Guns are, of course, a really fun weapon in video games. There's no denying that, but sometimes the satisfaction of some fisticuffs cannot be denied. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on GameRank's 10 hand-to-hand combat games that test your reflexes. Starting off with number 10, it's Sleeping Dogs, which is unique as far as open-world games go because there's some shooting in it. Sure, I mean that's not there, but most of the combat is hand-to-hand. It plays out like a slightly more beat-em-up inspired version of the fighting system in the Batman Arkham games. It's all about building up combos and deflecting enemy attacks so you can pull off takedown moves. Unlike Batman, the guy in this game isn't too preoccupied with not killing people, so some of these environmental takedowns are pretty brutal. The whole system isn't particularly deep, but it is a ton of fun and mechanically works very well. It's a tried and true combat system, and while it started in the Batman games, and technically Batman mainly fights hand-to-hand, the more street-level version we get in Sleeping Dogs feels like it's more in the spirit of this list. It's not a particularly hard system, unless you just crank up the difficulty, but it just feels good to smack guys around in it. At number 9 is Zeno Clash 1 and 2. These games are kind of bizarre. They're first-person brawler games, but with a surreal-as-hell art style and an insane story. That's probably the best way to describe it. I'm not going to be able to explain it, though. There's too much to it, and there's really just not enough time. But just looking at it, you would think it's some, abstract art game with very little to no gameplay, but there's actually a lot of depth in the combat. It's really fast, it's intense, and it's very satisfying to beat up these random freaks who get in your way. The first game's more of a short, linear experience, but the second one opens things up a bit more. Some prefer the more focused experience of the first, but the second does a lot to improve the actual brawling part, so while the in-between stuff is a little maybe more tedious, the actual combat parts are amazing. The team is actually making a new game in this weird universe called Class Artifacts of Chaos, so that's something to look out for. And number 8 is Overgrowth. This is a game that seems like they've been making it forever, and while the final product isn't the most amazing thing, especially on a technical level, the actual hand-to-hand combat stuff is still next level. There's really just nothing else like this game out there. It's a hand-to-hand combat game where you play as a ninja rabbit that's incredibly responsive and very smooth to control. Basically, everything else, like the presentation especially, isn't great, but the combat and the way your character controls feels amazing, and it carries the whole game. The fighting's really fast and brutal too, even if the controls take a little bit of getting used to. It's not exactly what you would expect in terms of the traditional control scheme you can expect from these types of games, but I also wouldn't say that it deviates so hard that you're not going to be able to get it. It's a sweet spot where the learning pays off because, like I said, your control of your character is just smooth as butter, and it's just an incredibly unique game, and I would say it's not for everybody, but not in a bad way. If you click with it, you're really, really gonna click with it. And number 7 is God Hand, created by Clover, the studio that would eventually become Platinum Games. God Hand is a really unique game. One of the more unique games to come out of Capcom for PlayStation 2, and PlayStation 2 was a golden era for the company. It's basically this 3D beat-em-up. The game's played entirely from a behind-the-shoulder perspective. You have tank controls, there's a few basic dodges, and a lot of different moves. Getting used to the game is going to take a little time, because it really plays like nothing else. The tank controls are not hard to grasp, but there's a lot of other stuff going on. There's not any other close-range combat game like this. The closest thing I can even think of is to compare it to Resident Evil 4, just because of the camera position and tank controls. But you think with controls that limited, the game would be on the easier side. It's definitely not. This game can and will mess you up. If you want to do well in it, you got to master the many, many possible moves that you can use. You need to know when to dodge, when to duck, when to counter, and even that might not be enough because enemies can be lightning quick and they do gang up on you on the first opportunity. It's a tough game and it really puts your reflexes to the test. And number 6 is Breakdown. In comparison to the martial arts madness of God Hand, Breakdown feels slow in comparison. It's not the fastest combat game out there, but it is an intense and interesting experience. Now, it was originally released on the Xbox. It's a first-person combat game that mixes up gun combat and martial arts action. And while the shooting, it's uninspired, let's say. The first-person combat was actually very innovative. This is a game that really tried to capture being in first person, and in a lot of ways, it very much succeeded. The combat was a lot more tactical than intense. Any missed attack leaves you open to a counter, so you really have to be careful and choose your moment to strike, because it can be really easy to get overwhelmed and beaten down. Like, there's tons of enemies to encounter, and especially by the end, the game actually kind of becomes nearly impossible. Now, it's not perfect by any means. It can be even pretty frustrating when you're doing well, but as far as hand-to-hand combat goes, it's one of the best representations of first-person combat there is. And number 5 is Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks, a game that doesn't get mentioned enough. Shaolin Monks is a beat-em-up set in the Mortal Kombat universe, where he plays either Liu Kang or Kung Lao during the events of Mortal Kombat 2. The game keeps a lot of Mortal Kombat staples like special moves and fatalities, but it incorporates them into the game's more free-form combat system, and it works really good, and it's very satisfying to play, especially with a friend. It's multi-directional combat before Batman Arkham games were a thing, or even thought of, or anything like that. That was long before their standard appeared, but in many ways it's actually kind of a more satisfying and complex system, even if it's not going to be like a big test of your razor-sharp reflexes. It's not an easy game though. Like, it's really not an easy game. Unlike a lot of beat-em-ups, if you die in this game, you can potentially lose a lot of progress, so getting the hang of combat is really, really important if you want a chance of surviving. It's just really a fun and all-around well-made game. That's one of the few fighting game spin-offs that not only worked, but is actually really good. And number 4 is Mirror's Edge Catalyst. In terms of testing your reflexes, this is actually one of the best first-person fighting games out there. For this kind of sequel, I guess kind of reboot, DICE totally ditched guns and made it so combat encounters were entirely hand-to-hand. Standard combat's not, like, too complex, but when you combine traversal abilities with the combat, the game gets really interesting fast. At certain points, the combat feels almost like a rhythm game than it does a beat-em-up. Each fight's basically a traversal puzzle that you have to solve while you keep up your momentum, so that you're always moving, which makes it harder for enemies to hit you, and using hit-and-run tactics to take enemies out. It's possible to get through most fights by just standing in place and punching and kicking, but it's way more interesting if you do it while parkouring around the arena. Now, there obviously are issues with Mirror's Edge, and just having good combat doesn't make a game good on its own, although I would argue Mirror's Edge Catalyst is at least a good game, if not as great as the original Mirror's Edge. But like it or not, Mirror's Edge Catalyst combines movement with combat in a way that is extremely interesting, even if it's not to your taste.
You're okay. I took care of them.
And number 3 is Absolver. Now, I'm not sure why so many hand-to-hand martial arts games end up being so strange, but here we are. Absolver is a really unique multiplayer co-op kind of experience. It's best described as a kind of Dark Souls meets martial arts experience. The game starts with you waking up with a weird mask on, and from there you have to explore this Forsaken Kingdom and take on other prospects while learning new combat styles. What makes this game really stand out is the combat system specifically. It's fast, fluid, and incredibly intense. There's a lot more moves you can learn, and each one has specific counters, like there's dodges, parries, power attacks, basically everything that makes a good combat system. A big part of the original release of this game was its seamless multiplayer, and fighting other players is a big part of the game. You don't actually have to do it though, there is a solo mode, but if you really want to test yourself going online, it's really the only way to do it. And number 2 is Streets of Rage 4. Most beat-em-ups are pretty mechanically simple. You just mash buttons when the enemies come close, but Streets of Rage 4 has a little more going on. On top of just generally being more challenging than a lot of games of its type, the actual combat has way more depth. Take blitz moves, for example. These are special attacks that can do a lot of damage to a group of bad guys, but drain some of your health in the process. What's interesting is that the health you lose can be restored from beating up enemies, but if you get hit, you'll stop healing. So it's a real risk versus reward system they have set up in the game, and it works. It's a game that rewards you for playing skillfully, because once you get good enough, you can use all these blitz moves all the time and fully restore your health back to normal every single time. And that's just the noteworthy thing. Like, the entire combat system is really great, complex but also accessible. And finally, at number 1, it's Sifu. There's no other hand-to-hand combat game that is as intense, challenging, and ultimately as rewarding as this one. Fights are lightning fast, brutal, and can end in an instant, especially for you. Death isn't a slap on the wrist in this one either, it's a core mechanic of the entire experience, because every single time you die in this game, you get a little bit older, and as you get older, you take more damage, but you also do more damage. And if you die all the way, you have to start the whole game over again. This wouldn't be much of a big deal, but this game really doesn't mess around. Like, enemies can and will really gang up on you at every opportunity, and the bosses require some expert reflexes if you want to survive them. It's a game that makes you feel like a chump at first, but you begin to learn enemy patterns, you start to figure out all the counters and special moves you need to succeed, and suddenly you're an unstoppable badass. Few games really make you feel like you become a martial arts master purely from just playing it. You start as a student, but by the end, you really do become the teacher. Some quick bonus games for you. First, Shenmue 1 and 2. What makes the first two Shenmue games unique is the combat's basically Virtua Fighter. These games are notoriously difficult, even for fighting games. There's not a lot of combat in them, but when it does show up, you really remember it because these games can and will kick in the ass. Moving on to Jet Li Rise of Honor, one of the first games with a multi-directional combat system out there. It's actually still quite a bit of fun. It's a short game though, and while the combat isn't very deep, it does make you feel like a badass. Next is Chronicles of Riddick, Escape from Butcher Bay, more of a hybrid game where you're sneaking, shooting, and stabbing, but there's also a decent amount of melee combat that's pretty simple, but there's a certain tactical feel to it that makes it really memorable as far as FPS melee combat games. And finally, the Yakuza series. Talking about hand-to-hand combat, you cannot not mention the Yakuza games. They're basically modern-day versions of those classic beat-em-ups that we all wasted so much time on back in the day. Many beatdowns you will perform in these games are done hand-to-hand, and combat is always tight and satisfying. There's few things better than a heat action in a Yakuza game, and while these things aren't exactly like testing your reflexes, it doesn't mean they're easy, and again, you gotta talk about them. These are some of the most fun fighting games out there. Just ask anyone who got on the wrong side of Mr. Shakedown. And that's all for today. Leave us a comment, let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is of course a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications, and as always, thank you very much for watching this video. I am Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time right here on Game Ranks.